Hello there.
Hey, Steve.
Spencer James.
All right, I'm honored. I don't know why I'm on here, but
Well, you're on here because you wrote this fantastic song, the band Special Messages. I know you have more than one band because we had Jarlsberg featured on our show before, but your band Special Messages wrote a song called Donora. And I had to talk to you about it because the song is just fantastic, and
thank you very much.
there's a lot of meaning behind it. Um, Before we do that, though, I want you to tell me a little bit about yourself and because you have a really interesting story where you've lived in a lot of different places like I have. Why don't you tell us your story? Because I think you started in PA, and why don't you just take it from there?
Well, yeah, nowadays people are a little more diverse. Back when I was born, it was kind of crazy. But I was actually born in Yugoslavia, in Zagreb, which is the capital of Croatia, which is its own country now. And I think I was talking to you earlier about it, that my dad was growing up in Mexico in high school, and my mom was in Donora, Pennsylvania, the name of the song, where her her side of the family all immigrated in the early 1900s. The Italian side, my nanuts came over after World War One. He was in Mussolini's army. He became a tailor in Monessen, and her father was Croatian. His dad came over. My grandfather was actually born here. His dad came over for like 10 years without his daughter and his wife, who were back in Croatia.
That
And
happened a
eventually,
lot.
right, and then, like, sometimes somebody would like send a representative to go find them, and somehow they ended up, he went as far as, I want to say, Idaho or something, and ended up back in the valley, as we call it. And he died when my grandfather was like 3, and actually my step great grandfather came in and raised my grandfather and the rest of his nieces and his sister, and was a wonderful guy who was a steel mill worker who went through all the protests and the beating ups and the first round of unions, and got the first union suits, and better living, working conditions. When he started, it was like you'd show up, and I think they would literally like pick guys out of the yard to come in and work, and you worked until it was done, whether it was 12, 16 hours, 110 degrees, whatever it was. He was in a foundry.
Wow.
So I had strong steel mill roots in my town. And then my mom, I think I mentioned this earlier as well, she got a scholarship to a university in Zagreb through her Croatian club, like an ethnic group called the Croatian Fraternal Union, which is all around the area of Pennsylvania. So she got a scholarship to go to this university, and my dad was like completely on another end of the spectrum. My mom was this nice Catholic school girl who wanted to go to college. My dad was in Mexico hanging around with a band called Los Rebeldes del Rock. And they charted maybe in the top 10, maybe #1 with a song. It was Poison Ivy, a cover of the song Poison Ivy, but they
Right.
changed some of the words. In Mexico, that happened a lot, where they would kind of appropriate American rock. And it was more like, 50s style rock, pre-psychedelic 60s rock, even though it was in the 60s that they charted with this song. And my dad was their like cousin. He took classes from their mom. It was a band of brothers mostly. And they charted big and had a couple movies and whatnot. And my dad was sort of their manager and road guy and whatever they needed him to do guy. But in any case, long story short, his dad never liked that and didn't want him doing the rock thing. And the band, my grandfather had some sort of mountain summer cabin or something in Cuernavaca. And my dad went there with the band after a show, and a bunch of, groupies and people hanging out and partying. And he left, and apparently they burned the house down. So that was the last straw for my grandfather. And he was like, you either go to college and do something different with your life, or you're out of the family. And my dad, a family man, said, okay, but I don't care where I go or something. No, my grandfather has his own story. He was this like revolutionary who was a farmers' rights and an indigenous people's rights guy, who was also a chemical engineer. So he, after they tried to kill him and bribe him and everything else, the government finally accepted what he wanted and sort of gave land back to some farmers and indigenous folks, and created an institute for arid lands, which he was running at that point, sort of a government agency. So he had some connections around the embassies. So my dad said, throw a dart. I asked my dad this story a couple months ago, and he still maintains they literally threw a dart at the map and it hit Yugoslavia, or it might have hit another country. And he was like, I don't want to go there. And he was like, well, how about Yugoslavia? I know the guy, the ambassador there or whatever. So my dad ends up at the same university as my mom, and boom, I'm born there. But after about a year of being there and then trying to live in Mexico City, by the time I was 1, we moved to my mom's hometown of Donora. And that's
Pennsylvania.
where until I was 12. And in 79, so the steel mill in Donora shut completely by like 66 or 67. So it went from this thriving, like awesome little town to people just trying to get jobs and having to commute to other towns. If you were high on the seniority list, you could work in other mills. If you were low, you were out of luck. So my stepdad was a Vietnam vet, and he was at Fort Devens in Nam, and actually saw a lot of concerts at the Tea Party in Boston, saw Hendrix at the Garden and stuff.
Legendary room.
Yeah. A lot of good stuff, like Tea Party late night. I guess they would play after the show was over. He saw like Clapton jamming with, whatever band played that night and whatnot. So he was injured for a month or so in a Jeep accident. And so he had a special kind of a secret ASA type of a job and wasn't affiliated. So while he was recovering, they like kicked him off the base. They were like, you're of no use here. So he started living on Beacon Hill and traveled up to Maine and discovered Maine. Now, when he got out, he was like, I want to be an antique dealer. And I fell in love with the history of Maine, of New England in general. And by 79, we were able to move to Wells, Maine, and they started.
Wells.
Yeah.
Now, when you started in music, that started for you in the Boston area?
Yeah. So I was a punk rocker in high school. Freshman year of high school, I met this kid who came from another school, and he was like, you ever heard of the Clash? You ever heard of the Sex Pistols? I was like, heard of them. At that point, I was like buying like the hardest rock you could buy at like Kmart, like Kiss Alive 2. And,
we all had that.
Right. And I was like, this is just not it, and I was listening to 60s 8 tracks and stuff. I needed something harder. And he was like, well, this is it, so I bought, the Clash's first record, Sex Pistols. Then like, the Dead Kennedys' Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables was probably one of my first, and just got full on into it. And that progressed into the hardcore stuff. My parents weren't really into me going to show. I really couldn't do much. I was kind of like always doing chores and not allowed to go anywhere kind of thing. And so I would sneak to get to a show. I think I'm going to my friends to do homework, and we'd drive to like the, AmVets Hall in Manchester, and we saw like DRI there once. That was a great show. Or my first
Manchester, New Hampshire.
I think it was Manchester. Nashua had one.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
And I'm still trying to figure out where that DRI show was. But yeah, he talked to us all, and it was kind of great meeting that guy. But I remember sneaking down to Boston in '83, and we saw The Fall at the Rat, one of the better shows. And Bird Songs of the Mesozoic opened, an offshoot of Mission to Burma.
Yes.
And Christmas, which was a great band. Man, I remember loving those guys. And it was a great show. And then we scuttled back to Maine and pretended like we had gone to the Maine Mall or something, So yeah, I fell in love with that, and then came to Boston in '84 to go to Mass College of Art, and finally was free to do whatever I wanted. I had like a noise band, was my first band, called Insanicide. And I was kicked out right before our big gig with Kill Slug, which was like my favorite band. But and we didn't have a song or rehearse or anything. It was pure just a spontaneous noise. But I missed a couple of practices because I was wrapped up in my welding project at school, and my good buddy Jim, who was a UNH DJ in college, kind of kicked me out of the band before Kill Slug. So I regret to that day that I forgot to go to practice.
I think I first got to know you when you were in Tip for Teens.
Yeah. Or
Because
Lucky Gold, even maybe.
oh yeah, right. I forgot about
Predated
that band.
the
Yeah.
trio.
I moved to Boston. Well, I grew up in New England, but I was in California and I moved back there around 96, 97.
Oh, okay.
And then I do know that when I first heard Tip for Teens, I totally flipped out on Mr. Riley, the
Right.
song Mr. Riley. And that's when we kind of got to know each other.
Yeah.
I don't think we'd even met before that.
Yeah, you were doing the Linwood and booking some
Oh,
friends.
yeah. Yeah.
And I met you at like Al's parties or whatnot. And I always remember that like I loved your exuberance and your love of music. And you're like the John Madden of music. Like, you loved it,
I'm
and you couldn't
still
get enough.
exuberant, man. I'm still
Great.
exuberant.
You are. Yeah, totally. And so yeah, it was great. Those Linwood days were really fun, and playing with Lucky Gold. And as you know, Bill was, I've never was on a label or signed or toured or really any of that stuff, but I was lucky to work with Bill, who was in Maelstrom on Tang Records. And he was kind of looking for
Oh, he
something.
was in Maelstrom?
Yeah, Bill was
Oh,
was
I
a
didn't know
good
that. That's
songwriter and the bass
awesome.
player for Maelstrom. Yeah,
Nice.
great bass. But Bill's just a natural. He can do anything with little practice. Just step in and play. But so yeah, I went to Mass Art with him for a couple of years, and also was a bike messenger with him. And so we kind of knew each other. So when I was looking for to start Lucky Gold, I kind of reached out to Bill, and he had just happened to become available. And there was a little bar on the corner by that Cambridge movie theater that's in East Cambridge. That big complex they built behind like um, where all the brewery and pool table place and that breakfast place that was in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. That East Cambridge
Oh, Friendly
movie comp.
Toast?
Yeah, on that street that you take to get to the movie theater, on the left on the corner for a little while in the 90s, there was a little bar there that was booking bands. I can't remember the name of it, but it was
You're not thinking of Kendall Square, are you?
it's the Kendall Square Theater area, right? Isn't it? Yeah.
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 Yeah, there was a bar, the Kendall.
Maybe it was called the Kendall.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was a really small room.
Next to the
Mostly,
Italian, there's like an Italian hall there or something, right?
boy, I am sorry, but my knowledge of East Cambridge is not very good, even though I lived in Somerville for 9 years. I didn't, for some reason, I didn't go over there that much.
Yeah.
But
It was kind of a netherworld, but being a courier, you kind of end up knowing all these places, But
so
anyway, yeah.
to fast forward a little bit, because I want to really talk about Donora. You moved to North Carolina, right?
So yeah, I think down here in 2011. It's already been 10 years.
In Yarlsburg, your other band, I mean, you put I think it was like a double album out.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
10
know.
years.
Yeah, I mean, so, and then one of the other members of Yarlsburg is playing with you in Special Messages, right?
Yes. Yeah. Craig, he's the resident genius. He's an engineer and just a bright guy. When I moved down here, Jeff Alsberg, the singer of Yarlsburg, was an old friend from one of my college friends. It was his high school best friend, and we ended up meeting. And he lived with me for a summer. We were fast friends, stayed in touch forever. And then he was already here working, and so when I came down here, and he's always an organizer, always has a basement with gear and knows people. So he was like, okay, let's have our first jam. And he brought Craig over, who would be in Yarlsburg. And immediately it was a great fit. Now, the funny thing was Craig was playing keyboards and whatnot. And he briefly mentioned something about piano lessons or whatever. And 10 years, when we put out the record somewhere along the line, I was like, so you've been playing like since you were a kid, huh, Craig? He's like, no, actually, I just bought my first keyboard like 6 months before I started playing with you guys. So I was like, really, dude? And he was like, yeah. And then he picked up the guitar a couple months ago, and he's like already better than everybody I know. So he's just great, and has a real love of electronics, and it caught fire kind of with me too. Whereas I was always sort of a traditional arrangement guy. Maybe some samples here and there, but I kind of embraced sequencing and electronic, drum
Mhm.
loop arrangements and whatnot. So we kind of both took off towards the end of Jarlsberg, and we're really like kind of feeding off each other. And I realized that I was recording some of my own songs simultaneous with Jarlsberg stuff, and we decided to have all the Jarlsberg songs just be the Jeff sung songs.
Mhm.
And I parsed off mine and then added like a few dozen, half dozen more songs to those, and that became what this album is, Scribbles and Splashes. And I realized like half the songs were created by Craig's instrumentals that I would add to. He has this way of just sending me drums and keys and stuff, and a song just clicking. So fast forward to the Donora song. I went back to my hometown in 2018 to
Which
put
is
my
about 20 miles outside of Pittsburgh, right, Donora?
It's south on along the Monongahela, which, as people who might not be from Pittsburgh might not know, the Monongahela and the Allegheny come together right at a dramatic point in Pittsburgh. And standing on that point is really intense because you could literally step right off the edge into the water.
I've
And it
been there. I've
forms
been
the
there. I lived in
Ohio.
Pittsburgh for 5 years, as I think you
Oh,
know.
was it really 5 years,
Yeah,
huh?
so you're talking about the beginning of the Ohio River right now. But you were like way on the other end.
So we were south, yeah, 40
Yeah,
miles, 40 minutes from Pittsburgh, something like that. And yeah, on a winding little sort of eddy, Donora has a nice little hump of the river, a curve, and it was perfect for the steel mills.
a lot of those towns outside of Pittsburgh had to deal with a lot of pollution from US Steel and all the steel mills and but now they've cleaned the place up a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
There's fish in the Monongahela River and eagles. And someone told me while I was living there weren't fish and eagles in that river for a long time because of the pollution.
It was very
So,
sketchy, yeah.
so what made you go back and why don't you explain the whole thing that happened? I believe I wrote it down. So 1948 is when
Okay.
this incident happened. Tell us about that incident.
Okay. I'm,
I know we weren't alive then, but
I'm not a true expert on it, but I give it a little pitch for the Donora Smog Museum, which is where the whole idea for attaching this incident to the song and realizing it was an integral part of Donora's history. But yeah, so there was a zinc works and the U.S. Steel and Wire mills along the river, and they had these giant smokestacks pushing out smoke all the time. Now, also many homes were heated by coal as well. The
right.
home I grew up in had a coal furnace, and you would have to sweep your sidewalk, every day of the coal dust. So imagine what you were breathing in, right? So anyway, yeah, in 1948, actually, I'm releasing this on the beginning of the bad week, which was October 24th, 1948. And my mom was actually just born in the first of the year. And so anyway, there was one of those weather inversions where the pressure pushed and kept all the smoke being produced in the valley. Donora is between like two foothills that reach down to the river. So, it just was like putting a lid on a pot cover and on a pot, and the smoke stayed in the valley, wasn't going away. People were starting to say, hey, it's time to shut down the mills, like you're still producing smoke and it's not going anywhere. And it was like you couldn't see in front of your face in broad daylight. So, of course, it was going to cost them too much money to shut the mill down. They dragged their feet. Eventually, I believe they did shut it down, but it was too late. And for like a week, this smog settled in the city. And just like the pandemic, anybody compromised, anybody with emphysema or anybody with breathing issues or anything, were the first to perish. I believe like 20 people died immediately during that week, and then another 30 some died in the following month. And then huge amounts of respiratory issues, way above the normal percentage. And the cancer rates I read recently also were way higher than neighboring towns, let alone just for the national average. So they settled with a bunch of family. There was some sort of class action suit, but of course it settled with a no, we take no blame kind of a part of the settlement. And as the history,
Naturally.
yeah, and as the history goes, the people that sued, by the time the fees and everything came out, they say they had enough money to buy a TV, really. You know, it was a shame, and and it was bad, but it did lead to clean air acts, and the Clean Air Act and other things came out of Donora, and the EPA started to enact. So Donora Smog Museum, which is part of the Donora Historical Society, their motto is "Clean air started here," because out of that it really became a notable. It started change with clean air policy.
And you gathered, it's amazing that you ended up writing a song from gathering all this information. I
Yeah, I
mean,
mean, the
what,
town is just, you know, it went from like 16,000 people to like 10 to 8, you know, when I moved, and now it's like about 5,000 people. I must say, you know, it's important that I don't sound like I'm, you know, uh, disparaging the town or saying that it's not good anymore or any of that. That was very key to releasing the song, because the song is, you know, sort of in its face a Billy Joe Allentown kind of a story, a sad, you know, our industry's gone and we don't have anything left, and you know, things are run down kind of a story, because that's how everybody that I know who moved from Donora kind of felt when they would go
yeah,
back over there. You'd be like, this is sad. Like, there used to be 10 bakeries, now there's one. You know, the main street, half the places are closed. I mean, I was on the main street at Saturday and not a single car passed me for an hour as I stood outside the Smog Museum, which is, in the song, I say a smog museum and a parking lot and a drugstore next to a lawyer. That's sort of what the main intersection is. And but the two guys that run the Smog Museum are really great. They did it volunteer basis, out of the goodness of their hearts, collected this nice museum of artifacts. And you know, as I was, so I was there, and I talked to them, and I was there because my Aunt Dorothy was my last relative in Donora, and she was 91, and we had to put her into a nursing facility. And so I cleaned out her house. And while I was there, I was just, you know, it's like being in a surreal dream when you go back to your old hometown, if it's been a while, you know. So I'm just seeing places that, you know, my little league field and where my grandmother's house was and my first grade school and all that. And so when I got back, enter Craig. Craig sends me my bandmate an instrumental, and I had written some words down, and it clicked. And it was one of those times where you just make the whole song in one night. You know, I stayed up till 2 o'clock in the morning. It was all crafted. The melody came out, and it's one of those ones where you almost go to sing it again because you're like, oh, that was a good rough, you know. And they were, you know, Craig was like, no, that's just perfect the way it is, which reminds me of kind of like the member of the 4-track days when you would write all your songs on 4-track. I remember, at least with my band, you'd always be like, God, the 4-track sounds so much better, you know, because you only had enough time to get into the studio, whip it out, you know, no add-ons, just do a live, you know, bass and drums, add it, stripe on the vocals, do a solo, and you're out, you know. But I think I
I
caught,
was, well, while you were talking, I was thinking about Chrissy Hine. I went back to Ohio. My
yes,
city was gone, you know.
for sure.
Seems like the Midwest, it went through a lot of change, you know, and a lot of it wasn't good. I mean, I learned all about Andrew Carnegie, obviously, when I lived in Pittsburgh, because he, you know, I believe he started US Steel, and he wasn't a very good guy. But then all of a sudden, at the end of his life, he became very generous. He
Yeah,
built a library, a museum, Carnegie Mellon University. And it's like,
totally.
after all the damage and everything that was caused from US Steel. And earlier we were talking about Braddock.
Yeah.
Braddock is another place right outside of Pittsburgh. It seems like a lot of damage was done during the industrial era, you know, in those towns.
It
And
was
you,
like a mix, you know, it's like they always talk about the yin within the yang. You know, it's never quite as simple and black and white as you want it to be, because
right.
my relatives were so happy. I remember my great grandfather who had he sounded like the Count from Sesame Street. Yeah. he had all these great stories. He was a shepherd in Croatia, and when Germany started to come over to take over Yugoslavia in World War One, he was like, "I'm not fighting for the German army. I don't have anything to do with them." He grabbed a passport and took off. So he was a shepherd. He'd tell these stories about, like, his dog saving him from a mountain lion and the beautiful hills of Croatia. And I remember saying, "Grandpa, it sounds so beautiful over there. And don't you kind of wish you were still there or something? Don't you want to go back?" And he'd go, "If it was so great, why am I here?"
I
But
love
we're
I
happy to have money and jobs, so it was a mixed
yeah.
lesson. It was the thing that was killing them was also putting food on the table. You
Yeah, I
know,
come from a family of immigrants as well, so I totally get that. My mother was in Italy during World War II in her
oh,
basement, hiding from the place being bombed to
wow,
shit. And then she came here when she was 21 years old, and
wow, very recent.
she's she still has the accent. But
Well,
everyone can't comes here to find a better life.
totally.
But
Yeah, and it was
uh,
easy then because they
yeah,
needed people, or
boy,
not World War II necessarily, but still, yeah, they still had mills going. And if you got to Ellis Island and you were a strong Eastern European guy, they were like, "Where you want to go? Pittsburgh, Cleveland, we need you." If you were an Italian, they were the masons and the bricklayers and the mosaic people. They would go, do
yeah.
certain things. And
Lot of factories in where I grew up in the Worcester area, Worcester, Massachusetts area. It was all factories, and all the Italians all worked in factories, and that's what they had to do. They had no choice. My
mm,
great grandfather was worked for the highway department, and he helped build the roads. He came here before his family did, like you were speaking earlier. He came out here all alone and then had to send for his wife and son later, and then his two sons, and then they came here, you know.
incredible, right? I mean, they were like true frontiers people back then.
I love when people find inspiration from things from the past to write songs about. It's like I like the true stories, the real stories that happen. Do you write a lot like that?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of it's funny the secrets that musicians kind of nobody ever wants to talk about whether their songs mean anything, or what I mean.
Oh, I
And,
know. I managed a lot of bands, and I
right?
try to get
Everybody swears
information.
that doesn't
I don't
mean.
know. It's
I
about
just
nothing.
that's just word. That's not my ex, or that's not my brother. That's not somebody I
Right.
hate. You know,
There was no
but
one ever called Mr. Riley. That's no, I don't know who Mr.
I just made that up.
Right.
But yeah, the Donora was special. The more I think a lot of artists will also tell you, musicians, that like you kind of never make as good as songs as when you're like sad or upset. I guess that's why it's the blues, right?
Depressed.
So
Yeah.
if you're happy, it's harder to make music sometimes. But yeah, so Donora, was a little different in that it was like so autobiographical and whatnot. But I've got to say that if you're paying attention, I'm one of those people that feel like the song writes itself, and I'm a vessel, and if I'm kind of in the right zone and I'm inspired by the music, it just sort of writes itself. But also sometimes you instead of putting the meaning into it, a lot of times you pull the meaning out of it after it's done. It's almost like analyzing a dream. So the process with Donora specifically was, the song, like I said, it was like sort of the old usual sad, my town's dying because the industry moved. But I thought that was sort of the end of the story. But it turned out, after talking to these Smog Museum guys who, like I said, put their heart and soul into it and really want Donora to rise from the ashes, and they have a John Fetterman kind of approach that let's make this better. So that at first, they were a little bit like, geez, it's sad because this paints a little bit of a picture of the Donora we're trying to leave behind. And I got that too, and I was slightly disappointed, or not. I was slightly worried people would think I was just, pooping on Donora a little bit, so to speak, without using the other word. I'm not. And what I happened to learn, in the press release I mentioned, it's a transformative experience doing the video, is that I realized that, everybody who kind of pines away for their old hometown or whatever, maybe the next step is to move on. So after writing this song, I realized pining away for the past isn't really constructive. And yeah, you need to feel it and talk about it and write the song and sing it. But ultimately, in the song, I think you can tell that this is my hometown and I'm proud of it. And my best memories happened here. And even if it's a ghost town and no one's left, it meant something, and it can mean something again. So through the video, I realized, okay, I cried my tears for the past, but now how can I help? I made a donation to the Smog Museum, and I want, hopefully people might donate to that cause. How can I help my old town and look forward to the future? So it was transformative in the idea that I'm done with my Allentown sad sob story, and now I want to let it go and move forward. Maybe there'll be another song about the future.
And this is coming out. Well, by the time this airs, it'll probably be out. October 24th, you said, is the official release date.
Yeah,
and
that
it's
was the
digital only.
The videos on YouTube, and our whole album is on all the normal distribution
like
sites.
Bandcamp. Can you go on Bandcamp and buy it?
I don't have it on Bandcamp because that's like a sell your own platform, but I could put it there.
Oh, so you doing Spotify and all that?
So I have it on everything else. Yeah,
okay.
Spotify, Amazon,
okay.
YouTube, Apple Music, all that stuff. It's a little hard to find because Special Messages is kind of generic. So Scribbles and Splashes is the name of the LP that comes up.
Well, I'm going to play the track on my new music show that's going to be out probably about in a week and a half. I'm recording it tomorrow, but I figured we'd do like a Zoom exclusive thing and get you on here to talk about it. Thanks. I'm a fan of your whole I call it lo-fi. I don't know if you call your style lo-fi. Is that what you would say?
Kind of, yeah, definitely. It's got a little, I've always been like a little bit of everything. There's like some chill, my solos can be punky and noisy. The vocals can be corny, and
it's
intimate.
True independent music, though, as far as I can hear.
I just go where the muses send me.
Now, do you guys play any gig? I mean, you're living like are you near a city? Because don't you live in a more rural area of North Carolina?
I do. Craig lives up in near Raleigh in a bedroom community right outside of Raleigh called Cary, and that's a normal city. They call it the Triangle. It's Raleigh, Durham, and Chapel Hill. They're all within like 20 minutes of each other.
College towns.
Yeah, Chapel Hill is a really cool, progressive town. I like, and the Cat's Cradle, you probably know.
Oh, so yeah, famous.
That's their place. Middle East,
Yeah.
And so I lived there when I first moved here. It was a great place for a New Englander to land. And then we moved down here. But so yeah, we actually are having our first gig. It's just me and Craig. It's a totally like not unplugged, but it's a really pared down version. Obviously, the album has drums, bass. That's the beauty of recording these days in a home studio. You can take your time and put as much stuff in there as you want. So it's it's a dense record, but live it's just more kind of a low key guitar and keyboard and maybe a drum.
Do you have a date lined up that you want to plug?
I think we're playing in Southern Pines in a place called the Jefferson Inn, a cute little outdoor venue for our first.
Southern Pines.
Yeah. There's a lot of these tall, skinny 100-foot pines here that are really pretty, and sometimes like you can just have full groves of those, and it's like Sherwood Forest or something. But
does the band have an Instagram or anything like that you want to mention? Facebook.
My Instagram account is there's a Facebook page called Special Messages. That would be great to follow. And my Instagram is the Instagram for the band so far. That's Spencer James, SPNCR James. But cool. Specialmessages.org is our website.
Nice.
And I put a quick couple links to like Spotify and Amazon or something to listen to the record, and the video is actually embedded on the webpage too.
Well, I appreciate you sending me the track. I really like it. I can't wait to hear everything else. I liked Jarlsberg too. I like your projects, man. You're doing some good stuff. So
thanks, man. I'm having a great time. I'm late bloomer.
Well, hey, thanks a lot, man, for doing this.
Steve, you're the greatest. I appreciate listening to my ramblings.
it's interesting to me. I learned a lot. I went and read all about Donora. I wanted you to tell the story, but I went on Wikipedia and read the whole thing, man. It's fascinating.
Fun. Yeah, actually, the town across the river is Webster, and I think you live in Webster. Yes, which is kind of weird. And we're
Very
both
good.
Italian too, which is nice.
Paisan.
Yeah, I
Thanks
know,
a
man.
lot, man. Appreciate
Okay.
it.
Thank you, Steve. Have a good one.
All right.